So welcome to a Red Feather Mind, Body, Spirit Facebook Live event. As usual, I'm Christopher McClure, and today we have a wonderful guest, Monica Bodirsky. This is her second time now doing a Facebook Live, so she's a seasoned professional. So most recently, she is the creator of the Shadowland Lenormand. It's beautiful, wonderful here. I'm getting a lot of fun insights with this. So we wanted to talk today to catch up and see, how things are going for Monica and more about this deck. But let's talk about her background here. So Monica Bodirsky is a first-generation Canadian artist, an author, and an advisor with 40 years of professional experience, informed from a familial Northern and Eastern European gift for seership and folk magic. She's passionate about making creative tools that foster self-awareness and empowerment. Her previous work includes the Lucky Lenormand Oracle, which I remember, by the way. So the House of Shadows Lenormand deck, which was the first version of this one. The Shadowland Tarot book and deck, as well as numerous international workshops and lectures and written work and visual arts and connecting with earth-based spirituality when you have time. Divination and creativity. And she's also founder of the annual Witch Fest, North Arts and Cultural Festival, a seasonal faculty member at OCAD University, an avid herbalist and social activist. And so it's great to have you back for another one of these. So we were talking about how we had to end the last one because we were going too long. So we'll see how we go this time. So it's nice to have you here, especially talking about Lenormand, because the first time we met, we talked about the first time we met, which was at the Reader Studio. And I think you were promoting the Lucky Lenormand at that time. You had that little, I think I saw a little version of it somewhere around here in my very cluttered office, but I have a version of that. But we're talking about now the Shadowland Lenormand, which grew out of your House of Shadows, which is the follow-up, and this is the follow-up to Shadowland Tarot. So we're going back to we're re-entering the Shadowland, as we said. And so I wanted to kind of get your ideas about, what is the Shadowland really? What does that represent? What is it? Could you describe it? I know, it has to do with shadow work, and so I'll just let you go from there.
Okay, bye.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. It's really nice to see you again and have another one of these lives. And I've been looking forward to it. That's an interesting question, Shadowland. It's sort of a psychological space. It happens to be my little studio here, the Shadowland studio. And it is, for me, a mystical place filled with magic and shadowy creatures and creativity. And those creatures that I draw and illustrate are to help us learn a bit more about ourselves. So Shadowland is a really interesting space where you not only walk up and meet your shadows, but you have a good time in there. I think that's important to me, is that you're enjoying your creative and spiritual self as interconnected and intertwined. And you mentioned shadow work a little bit, and yeah, shadow work, aspects of our personality, and they represent all of us on our very human journey. And my illustrations are a kind of quirky pen and ink and watercolor, as you know. And that's to make you smile a little bit so that while you're in some place called Shadowland, you don't get too terribly spooked by it all. So that's just a little bit about what that space is. It is a physical and psychological space for me.
Okay. Speaking of the psychology, the idea that, and I may be totally wrong, but the idea of like shadow work basically grew out of Carl Jung and the Archetypes, and dealing with the shadow side of things. Could you go into how that, maybe a little bit about the archetypes? I know that's a broad question, but how it relates to the shadow work.
Right. And yes, absolutely. Carl Jung, he had a lot of theories and was contemporary of Sigmund Freud, but he was very innovative for his time and an interesting person because his father was really kind of into fundamentalist religion. And his mother, though, was kind of very mystical and believed her dreams. So some of the aspects of our shadows, well, we're all human. We all have a certain darkness to our personalities. Generally, shadows within our personalities are considered instinctual or base behaviors. And it's important, I think, to distinguish between being a bad person and at times behaving badly and separate those. I mean, we all have the capacity to do things that we could never imagine ourselves doing
Mm-hmm.
in day-to-day lives given certain circumstances. So
Mm-hmm.
shadows doesn't mean we're bad people. And certainly that's not what Jung was about.
Mm-hmm.
Jung believed that if we looked at those shadow aspects of our personalities that we've repressed, we can embrace them as just part of the human experience and be integrated whole people. And I think part of that means not being so judgmental about others. There's a lot of work about projecting our shadows onto others. If we don't have issues that are resolved in our own lives, we might just express them negatively as things we see in other people. And I think it's tricky because we have really solid beliefs about ourselves, and we tend to maintain those through something called a confirmation bias or upholding anything that supports those beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that contradicts that,
Mm-hmm.
we want to repress that and discard it. And usually that is because our society has dictated that those are improper behaviors or they're not good. You're not a good person if you are A, B, or C. So
Mm-hmm.
they're imposed on us very early on, and they may not be anything that we would consider actually bad, but we've been told they are.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
no, thank you. I mean, it seems to me that within that, not necessarily, I guess, embracing is a strong word, but coming to terms with that part of ourselves.
Yeah.
You related to doing this work, and you hear a lot about doing the work, but is can really lead to self-actualization. You kind of knit that together in this little book, which is it's small, but there's a lot of good stuff in the book too. And you do talk about how that is related, and how you can if you explore these aspects of your personality or the kinds of things, you can actually really lead to a greater acceptance of your strengths and weaknesses, and help to integrate those things and learn from them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of this too is that you could say shadow work is reclaiming and rewriting your own narrative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the things that we're told and that we tell ourselves that we've internalized, coming to terms with that. There are some things that, yeah, you're right. We can maybe work on and say, well, that's a strength. That's excellent. That's a weakness. Maybe I should look at that. Maybe there's something I can do about that. Maybe it isn't actually a weakness either. Our imaginations do some pretty wild things, and once these areas are brought to light and we discuss them, I really think that's half the battle right there is just the
Mm-hmm.
awareness, you know?
Definitely, definitely. So now with Lenormand, which is related to, no, actually not related to tarot, it's kind of cartomancy, kind of divination. So, and I know that you're a big Lenormand. Well, you like all kinds of divination. So into so many different kinds of things. So what intrigues you about Lenormand, and could you explain a little bit about the differences between this and tarot, if you wouldn't mind?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I do like Lenormand.
Mm-hmm.
And I find the symbolism really direct in its meaning, and the narrative and sentence building that you do with Lenormand is fascinating. And it is for me a bit like sleuthing or solving a puzzle, a bit more so than tarot, because. And interestingly, Lenormand is believed to have derived from ancient coffee ground reading symbols, and this began
Mm-hmm.
in Turkey. And this type of reading made its way into European coffee houses, and then that translated into cards.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much Vienna is where a lot of those cards were used, those coffee house cards. And it was actually Mary Kay Greer, who's a tarot scholar, who found examples in the British Museum of
Mm-hmm.
30 cards that were forerunners. There's fewer cards than tarot, which is interesting too. I don't necessarily think that makes it easier, but I suppose it would be less daunting if you were first starting out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the symbolism, as I said, is fairly direct in that it's simple relative to many tarot decks that have very complex imagery. There's no suits, there's no major or minor arcana. It's 36 symbols, And you read them, excuse me, very differently because the tradition is the grand tableau, which is to put all 36 cards down
Mhm.
at once and then turn them over and read by proximity, which I guess you could say you do a little bit with tarot in spreads, but not to this extent. This is by locating cards that signify certain things like finances or love, and then understanding them, reading by proximity as to how far they are away from the seeker card or how close.
Mhm.
So it isn't just the proximity, it's the sequence and the placement of the cards, and that's quite different from tarot. And you're right. I do like a lot of divination techniques,
Right.
but this one is 1799 to 1840s is when it became established, and
Mhm.
it has a history too, which I find the evolution very interesting.
Yeah, the history of it, it really is fascinating. Marie-Anne Lenormand was as a reader for Empress Josephine, I believe, in the in Napoleonic era. You actually, it's really amazing how much history you really pack into this. You talked about, the genesis of this from the Game of Hope and the coffee grounds, how that came out of the, like you're saying, Vienna area, and then into Lenormand, and then I don't think you actually addressed this. So I apologize, but it was kind of like pieced together. Then after her passing, though, was like what this really was,
Mhm.
and you have about how her son was. Anyway, I don't want to give it all away, but there's a lot of intrigue in packing this little thing. It's just about the history of Lenormand. So that's wonderful. And the Grand Tableau, you have an explanation of that specific kind of spread, which is very important to the understanding of Lenormand in general, the positioning and all those kinds of things. But you also have
Mhm.
other spreads as well. You talk about an ancestral inspiration. I know that ancestral kind of elements are, important for you, how those things fit together. So that is kind of like part of your personality, within this for that spread. So that's really, really neat. And also your shadow spread, those kinds of things. There's a lot of different ways to use the deck. And I really like the idea of you had these little and a lot of Lenormand have like a positive and a negative and a neutral kind of connotation to them, and these don't, right? So which is kind of,
Right.
I don't know if I'm gonna I'm gonna call it groundbreaking because I it's and almost every other Lenormand I've seen they've had that positive negative, and this just leaves it more open. But the alternative is that you have these reflective questions then for each of the images for each of the cards to say, okay, which kind of for me takes the place of that a little bit. So I threw a lot at you there. So maybe could you maybe explain, why they don't in this for this doesn't have a positive and negative and neutral connotation as others do.
Right. Thank you. And that is a thing that many people enjoy. And there may be a few people who are very much traditionalists who will not appreciate that. But I've had such positive feedback
Mm-hmm.
from people saying that they enjoy the fact that they're a bit more open-minded in that context, a contemporary context. I found it very important because in looking at shadows, there is positive, neutral, and negative. Those are just judgments that we impose upon things. And
Mm-hmm.
while the Lenormand had those aspects, I think a lot of that was because it came from the Game of Hope. Um, and the
Mm-hmm.
Game of Hope was a race game. And so if you landed on a particular card, the whole point of the positive aspect was to move you forward. Stay where you were as neutral and backwards. I think it's kind of like Monopoly here. I don't know. Or
Sounds
Snakes and
like it.
Ladders,
That's what I got.
right?
Yeah, that's what I thought of when
Yeah. So I just thought that no, each card is holding all of those aspects. And especially when you're doing shadow work, if you're looking at the shadow, I incorporated those aspects into my illustrations to try to help people and also contextualize things the way I see in tarot, just a little. So the symbols are there, but they
Mhm.
are within some form of action to help people read that. That's for accessibility and also having them positive, neutral, and maybe challenging aspects as well. I think it's important that we encourage people to do some critical thought and take a look at things, especially with shadow work. And I'm hoping, as you mentioned, reflection questions encourage that sort of, well, is that really a positive thing? Let me just check. Because it's hard to be objective when we're doing this kind of work. And I think it helps our objectivity just to sit with the cards, engage, and take our time and just really look at all aspects of every situation. That is also part of my personality that came through in the cards.
Definitely, definitely. Just to give the audience an understanding of what we're talking about here too, with some of the aspects. So for each card there, there's a nice little write up here. I just opened to the tree, so we'll talk about the tree. So so a person sits on a swing attached to a tree with adorned branches. So it describes what the card is. So it has your keywords, health and well-being, and heart and circulatory system. It has the shadow aspect, which is ignoring health issues, especially circulatory or respiratory issues, be cut off from family, feeling physically ill, those kinds of things. And then a really nice message here about that. I won't read all that. But then reflection questions are: how do you generally assess your overall well-being? What do you have? What do you require right now to feel secure? And how often do you get physical checkups? And so just those, no, it's good questions, really. So for each of these, really, you can just take even one card. And I say this a lot, but I mean, one card can be a meditation. Well, it could. If you're pulling this, it's like, what is this really saying? And you do talk a little bit about it in the book about using Lenormand and tarot, and the way that I've always kind of divvied them up. Tarot isn't quite as, maybe precise is the wrong word, but it's more, it has overarching kind of ideas, whereas Lenormand is, as you described earlier, more direct. So how would you, and I could be wrong, but how would you then knit those together if you're using tarot and Lenormand, or can you?
Oh, absolutely. And I really like just pulling them together. Like I will pull a few tarot cards if I'm doing something, and sometimes I'll just pull one single Lenormand card and take a look. And it has a way of very quickly, for me, confirming either what I was reading or kind of smacking me and going, no, and this is what it meant. And I go, oh, right. So again, that objectivity and perhaps what we're talking about, it being very direct. Yeah, I find that kind of clarity sometimes. And it isn't to say that tarot isn't clear, but tarot is something that has a lot of depth. Sometimes to sit down when you have the headspace and you want to take your time with a particular theme deck, you might understand the history of tarot or not, and all of those symbols. There's so many layers of symbolism and interpretation, whereas Lenormand is generally the symbol, and it is open to interpretation. It's not dependent necessarily on your belief system or your cultural background, whereas tarot has a lot of loaded imagery. So I think this also helps with objectivity. Sometimes I will do a full Lenormand spread, on the other hand, and I will pull a few tarot cards and see how it's working. I'm notorious for mixing and matching, and it isn't because I don't have respect for traditional ways of reading. I do know all the traditional ways of reading. For me, though, it's vital for creativity for you to be able to pull cards together and have them support one another. So somebody might find tarot so familiar and Lenormand not, that they might use them in that reverse order of support for clarity, is what I was trying to say. Or, you might just want to do some tarot spreads with your Lenormand cards. Or you might, and I've even suggested this, and people think this is kind of wild, but I just pull out 36 cards from the tarot deck on occasion and do a grand tableau and see how that goes. And so you can use the cards interchangeably. As far as I'm concerned, there are some rules that you might want to read up on or follow, but it's open to interpretation and however you feel comfortable. And that's what I really enjoy about the Lenormand. Again, is it is poetic, but it is
Mhm.
pretty straightforward. I've already had feedback, by the way, from this deck, and people have contacted me on Messenger and in my email, people I do not know, by the way, to let
Okay.
you know, not my friends and family, no, people who are just using the deck because
Hmm.
they found it interesting, who have told me, wow, this is really straightforward. I thought your tarot was, but this is even more direct.
Hmm. Wow,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. And I was going to ask you, like, how do you feel then it pairs with the Shadowland, tarot? Of course, I mean they're kind of designed to pair together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you wrote a blog for us here too that was Little Sister No More, right? And so it's like, yeah, and you referenced how it's Lenormand will come into its own here. I think it's really the popularity and interest and understanding has really skyrocketed over the last especially 5 years, really grown in things. And I think would you attribute that to any specific reasons? Is it because that people who are doing tarot is like, oh, something new, or just because or is there more of a spiritual thing, or do you have what would your take be on that?
I think that it's pretty complex and it is kind of nuanced, but I do
Mm-hmm.
think it's a combination of all of those things. I think
Mm-hmm.
recent circumstances with COVID, people have turned inward and tend to look towards spiritual things in crisis. And
Right.
also the awareness and internet of Lenormand. A lot of people will just say, yay, it's new, and collect cards. Not that I've ever done that, but it's also, I think, just people being more open-minded and perhaps not as uh, concerned about how we're defining very traditional ways of being. I think people are much more open to gnosis and personal experience with
Mm-hmm.
spirituality in general over the last little while. And so they're
Mm-hmm.
saying, well, sure, I've tried oracle decks, I have tarot, but yeah, I'll give Lenormand a try. Because people are talking about it. You can find people who've got a lot of videos and share about it. And once it's shared to that extent and people see it being used and people reading with a Lenormand, it's not that, spooky anymore, that it's a technique you can't use. It's sort of like, oh, I could give that a try. If you can pull a single card, maybe that's all right. When you
Mm-hmm.
tell people about the grand tableau and that's the way you need to do it, with all due respect, I find that a little gatekeepy, and I think that people should be able to
Mm-hmm.
enjoy the cards the way they like. If it's for the art, good on you. If it's for shadow work, great. If it's because you want to try something new, also wonderful. Like it's just
Mm-hmm.
we're expanding and it's such a tiny world now. We're becoming aware of all sorts of divination techniques, and that's great, I think.
Definitely. No, I completely agree. And you're seeing interest in a wide variety of different divination, techniques as well. So with this one too, now I know that this one grew out of one of your self-published, the House of House of Shadows. And so for this one, what did you really like about this one? Did you really pour into this? That was, or how's it evolved, I should say, from what you've done before.
Yeah, I took a look at the images from the House of Shadows, and I had loads of fun with them, and I've included a few expansion cards with different editions. But I
Mm-hmm.
think with this deck, I took a little bit more time, and I actually redrew all of the images. At first, I was thinking, oh well, I could just use, and I went, no, this is an opportunity for me to use the imagery, but
Okay.
draw them because I want to use watercolor paints with them and do that
Mm-hmm.
slightly different. I think using the color, which is supposed to evoke kind of that in between space, that liminal space of twilight. This is why I like the mauves and pinks and a bit of the yellows and golds. It's
Mm-hmm.
very much that liminal time of day. So I really enjoyed adding the color. As much as I love black and white ink and illustration, clearly, I really did have a good time making some minor adjustments and not taking away the spontaneity, but refining just a little bit and
Hmm.
painting and doing the watercolor, because that's just such a satisfying kind of an activity and very meditative. And I always throw magic in with my stuff. I painted them with, yes, once again, full moon water.
Oh, okay. The full moon water. There you go. Actually,
Right.
I didn't realize that you had redone all of these just like that. So much respect for that. So that's really neat. Now, as far as with this too, we mentioned other forms of divination, those kind of things. Like what do you use the most, or what forms of divination do you use most? Is it Lenormand, or is it tarot, or is it something else, or is it or is it just the day, or the need?
The most frequent is cartomancy. So
Hmm.
I use Lenormand and tarot. I I have them occupying the same tarot pouch. They're in there together, and I use them together all the time. I also, though, it's interesting you're talking about time. There are certain times of year or certain situations where and this is fairly, my next line there is bone and curio casting. I do a
Hmm.
lot of bone and curio casting and it's very much like a grand tableau with objects, and you read
Right.
by proximity as well. So I really enjoy that. And also
Hmm.
runes, I read runes, and
Okay.
I scry. I do look into
Okay.
crystals and see what I can see there, because that is completely blank slate, and that is a very different process.
Definitely. No, that's something I've always wanted to learn better. So as far as crying, anyway, so that's a whole different thing. So we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
With that then too. So how do you find the metaphysical industry? Well, not industry, but just it seems to me that there's just so much more of an interest in these kinds of things too, and it's a variety of reasoning. Could you speak to, like, why do you think there's been this elevation in the interest, of mind, body, spirit, and the metaphysical and the cartomancy in general, then too.
I honestly think that we are changing as a society and a community uh, very rapidly. And a lot of that has to do with a technological revolution, very similar to the Industrial Revolution at the late 1800s.
Hmm.
Um, People were sharing ideas and thoughts. And so, with the technology of phones and texting and everything, being having the honor and privilege of seeing how other people live their lives and their spirituality has
Hmm.
created this new space of it no longer being necessary to follow whatever religion perhaps you were raised with. People want answers. They want to
Hmm.
feel empowered, and they
Hmm.
don't necessarily wish to be told what to do to the same extent as perhaps society used to. So
Hmm.
we become explorers in a way, and we are free to
Hmm.
take a look at whatever it is we'd like to believe in. And so it created a huge group of seekers and
Hmm.
people looking for answers. But more than that, I think there's always been a fascination with the mystical,
Hmm.
things that we cannot see, unacknowledged spirits, subconscious, the things that perhaps we didn't have time for when we were, and some people still don't, do being in survival mode. But the more we are looking inward, the more I think we just want to question all the things that we're told
Hmm.
unequivocally, whether it is
Hmm.
about science or religion. Spirituality is kind of this amorphous space of you are free to have self awareness, grow, self improvement, and for the purpose, I think, of bringing that out to humanity and making, I hate to sound super idealistic here, but making the world a better
That's okay.
place. As
Sure.
when we know more about ourselves, I think we have a whole different empathy towards people that maybe we didn't before. We are in times of political upheaval and social upheaval and a health crisis. And it's important for people to be centered and balanced, almost to do battle with what is going on around us and to really understand where our own values lie. And that, to me, is very tied into spirituality, and I'm sure contributes to why it's more popular or growing.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're exactly right too. People are there. You mentioned the abundance of seekers now. People are definitely, investigating different paths, different systems. So it's really, amazing to see, and it's really hopeful that more can discover their spiritual selves, in a very robust way. So now, to that point, is there anyone who's really, inspired you on your spiritual journey in general that you would say that they've really been it might be a whole bunch of people too, but who's really inspired you on your own journey throughout this in this area?
There are a whole bunch of people because, now that I'm not 25 anymore, I've had people to thank for that in short mentorship and discussions. I think some of the strongest, voices in this area were within the Native Canadian community. And I was working and volunteering at the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto for quite a while. And the spirituality of people who have had so much stolen and taken and colonized and still holding on to a deep reverence for the earth really affected me. There have certainly been a lot of elders from that society, and quite a few people within the witchcraft community. People's books have affected me very much in Eastern philosophies. Honestly, there's way too many people for me to list, because then I go to all of my inspirations in the artistic community. So I really, really appreciate the words, and I'm a voracious reader, of course. I want to hear what everyone has to say, and I really love hearing contrasting points of view, so that inspires my critical thought, and all of that has been wonderful. So I really can't, I'm not being evasive here, I just can't point to a single person.
I understand. No, and that speaks to, I think, who you are as a member of the community, that you can pinpoint that necessarily. I mean, that you have so many points of inspiration. It's like, it's I've always found, for you as a creator, you definitely, you always put out wonderful things, but there's always a humility to what you put out, realizing that you're just creating just to give, essentially. That's always what I felt from what you create, and I think that's really, a wonderful thing, what you're giving back to, humanity in general, to go back to that, to getting back to, so people can better understand themselves, and what makes them tick, and to be able to improve. So what's coming up next then for you? What lies ahead? What's next for Monica?
I'm always making a mess here in my studio with painting and drawing and writing, and I really do love writing. At some point I'm going to dig right. I mean, I'm working on oracle cards. Of course, I have to always be sketching new cards and tarot, and but I guess the secret pastime is probably writing and working on writing mystery and thrillers, because that's just a fun thing that I do. But for the most part, I'm teaching online, and I'm offering coaching online through my website and products. So I keep pretty busy, but I try to keep a good work-life balance with those things that I find creatively and spiritually fulfilling, for sure.
That's great. And so what are you teaching right now, and what are your
well, I have classes all the time through my site, and I've done so many Lenormand intensives over 2 and 3 days, and as
Great.
well as tarot intensives, intuition. I did get my certification as a chartered herbalist. Why not? Uh, that was done online, and I thought, you've got a year, why not? And so I also offer, classes on wildcrafting and herbalism. I love mixing essential oils and blending things.
Mhm.
So primarily, though, it is about reading
Mhm.
cards or oracles and curio and bone casting.
Mhm.
And coaching is to help people integrate their entrepreneurial selves sometimes with their spiritual and their creative selves. So it's kind of different. I call it witch life coaching instead of just coaching because there's lots of
Sure.
magic involved, and they're open-minded folks who have that feeling that there's more to it. And it's interesting because it's a non-denominational kind of an open spirituality where people just say, I have unusual dreams, and I'm going, well, you've come to the right place. Let's talk about the symbolism there, in your dream imagery.
Yes.
So it's interesting
Yes.
in that it's not a very specific space, but people who have those kind of questions are attracted. So those are all the
Mhm.
things that I do, and of course I, sell my products through my site. I'm doing YouTube videos. They drop every Sunday morning. They have for a year and a half now, and I hope those are
Okay.
helpful tips on how to read cards. And I
Mhm.
also do readings on IGTV every Wednesday, just quick little readings Wednesday and Friday for people. And that's, I'm sure I'm
Okay.
forgetting stuff, but it would make me sound like a little bit of a workaholic.
Believe it. I don't know. You're definitely you're taking up your time there. So you're that's great. So what is your site then? If someone wants to check out what you're doing there, what's your site? Is it?
It is www.monicabodirski.com. If you can spell Monica and if you can get the Bodirski with a Y, you will find me,
Mhm.
and you can take a look at my
Yeah.
site. There's quite a bit on there to wade through.
Okay. That's great. And you mentioned IGTV. You're on social media. I know you're all very active on the social media as well. So I imagine that's a great way for people to reach out and contact you as well. I'm sure through your site, people can do that too. So you always seem to be,
Yeah.
open to feedback, about this. You actually just asked for it today. Please give me feedback. I'm glad you're getting that already. And the initial feedback to this is really great. We have a couple people who are tuning in here that are really enjoying just Lenormand, and it looks like they're enjoying just the journey here. We have Rowena. She's your amazing mentor, so she's thank you for being a mentor.
Thanks,
Then
Rowena.
yeah, and Aya there. And Aya just became a mentor. So yeah, so you're picking up, you're there. So it's wonderful that you're making this impact for people. It's wonderful to be able to talk again here. So I think this is the second Facebook Live that we've done here. So that's great. So your first, so it was in this perfect follow up, perfect way to continue our conversation, and it will not be the last. I can guarantee you that. It won't be the last time that we do this. So thanks so much for everybody who tuned in today to learn about the Shadowland Lenormand. It's available on redlettermbs.com, wherever My by Spirit items are sold. And also everywhere. We're thankful to have it. It made it here. It was an arduous journey, but it made it here. So now you can get it. Yay! So that's great. So thanks everybody for checking this out, and have a beautiful day. And check out Monica's site, and check out the Lenormand, Shadowland Lenormand. So have a wonderful day, everybody. All right.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Bye.